Before we begin this touching tale, make sure you subscribe to the channel and activate the bell icon so you don't miss the next incredible stories we bring here. Out in the vast stretches of the western frontier, where winters are sharp and silence often speaks louder than words, lived a solitary man known to the nearby townsfolk only as the Black Rancher. He wasn't one for many words, nor for the company of strangers. His ranch sat nestled between pine ridges and snowy ridgelines, an old wooden house worn by time and wind. People whispered that he once rode with the cavalry, while others said he just wanted to forget something. He'd lived alone for decades, with no kin, no wife, no children, only his horses, cattle, and a loyal old dog who never barked. On one particularly bitter evening, as snow began to sweep across the land like a ghostly curtain, he heard something unusual, the faint sound of music. A piano. Out here. He thought his ears were deceiving him. But there it was again, faint but unmistakable, a delicate melody dancing in the wind. He threw on his coat, grabbed his lantern, and followed the sound down toward the tree line near the creek, confused and curious. As he approached, he saw a figure huddled beside a broken-down wagon, trying to shield something large under a tarp. The man was shaking from the cold, his fingers stiff, and beside him was an upright piano with one cracked leg and its keys exposed to the weather. "You'll die out here," the rancher grunted, not offering a hand but gesturing to follow. The stranger nodded without hesitation. His lips were blue, and frost clung to his beard like powder. Inside the ranch, the piano tuner warmed by the fire, his hands trembling as he sipped hot broth. He said little at first, but his eyes carried stories he wasn't ready to tell. "Name's Emmett," he finally said. "Been tunin' pianos since I could walk. This here instrument's from St. Louis. Commissioned for a rich lady in Carson City. I was halfway there when the storm hit." The rancher just nodded, silently placing more wood on the fire. Emmett stayed the night, then another. Days passed, and the snow didn't stop. The rancher offered space in the barn to keep the piano from cracking, and in return, Emmett helped feed the animals, fix fences, and clean tools. Slowly, they fell into a rhythm. Emmett didn't ask questions about the rancher's past, and the rancher didn't press Emmett about the scar on his neck or the nightmares that sometimes woke him in the dark. But one night, after dinner, Emmett asked if he could tune the old upright piano in the corner of the house. The rancher had forgotten it was even there, covered in a dusty tarp and years of silence. Emmett wiped it down, tightened strings, realigned hammers, and polished the keys like they were holy relics. When he sat to play, the first chord echoed through the cabin like a memory. It was warm, sad, and full of a kind of longing neither of them had voiced aloud. The rancher sat still, his face unreadable, but his eyes glistened. Night after night, Emmett played. Blues. Gospel. Ragtime. Melodies that reached deep into the walls, stirring ghosts the rancher thought he'd buried forever. One night, Emmett played a lullaby so hauntingly familiar that the rancher stood up, walked to the door, and stepped outside into the snow without a word. That night, the wind carried more than cold. It carried voices. Faint, but there. The rancher couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, listening as Emmett repeated the melody again, slower this time, as if pulling it from the very bones of the house. The next morning, the rancher asked where Emmett learned that song. Emmett paused, looked confused, and said, "Didn't learn it. I heard it once. A woman used to hum it in my neighborhood, back when I was a boy in New Orleans. It stuck with me. Don't know why." The rancher's face turned pale. He whispered, "That song was written by my wife. She sang it for our daughter, before the war took 'em both." Silence hung in the air. The fire crackled. Emmett looked stunned. I don't understand," he said, his hands trembling. The rancher stood, walked to an old chest, and pulled out a faded photo. It showed a black woman in a church dress, standing beside a little girl holding a music sheet. On the sheet, the title of the lullaby was written in cursive, Anna's Song. Emmett's breath caught. He pulled out a worn notebook from his coat. Inside it, the same melody was scribbled in pencil. "I don't know how this got here," he whispered. "I've had this since I was a child." The pieces began to align. Emmett, abandoned as a baby and raised in an orphanage, always believed he had no past. But the melody had lived in him. A song meant only for a daughter now lost, and yet it survived. The rancher trembled as he whispered, "What year were you born?" Emmett answered. The rancher sat down slowly, his hands over his face. "That's the year the cabin burned. I was away with the militia. I came back to ashes. I thought they were gone, but maybe she ran. Maybe she left to protect you." In the following days, the two men sat and talked. Emmett remembered flashes, a warm voice, the feel of a wool shawl, a song humming him to sleep. The rancher filled in the rest. His wife had Cherokee ancestry and had family near New Orleans. It made sense. It was possible. Too many coincidences stacked into something undeniable. One night, Emmett played Anna's song once more, and the rancher joined in with a harmonica he hadn't touched in years. The melody filled the ranch with warmth, sorrow, and something sacred. It felt like healing. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel now and join us for more true stories that stir the soul and connect us across time. Activate the bell so you never miss a tale from the Old West that still echoes in today's hearts. In a world full of noise, sometimes a quiet melody carries the biggest truth. In a storm, in the silence of the prairie, one man found a son he never knew he had, and another found a name he never knew belonged to him. That winter, the snow didn't stop, but neither did the music. And through that music, a family was found again. The next morning, Jeremiah woke up early, the chill in the air nipping at his skin as he tossed more wood into the fire. The storm had calmed but left behind a quiet whiteness covering the land like a cold shroud. He brewed coffee and walked into the barn, where the piano tuner lay wrapped in blankets, still asleep. Jeremiah watched the man's chest rise and fall, the breath of life warming the silence of the morning. Something about this stranger felt familiar. Not his face. No, that was new. But there was a presence, an energy. Jeremiah shook his head. He'd lived too long with ghosts on the plains. Maybe he was starting to see things that weren't there. When the tuner woke, his first words were a soft, "Thank you." He introduced himself as Ellis, a piano tuner who traveled from town to town, fixing old instruments and playing songs in exchange for food and warmth. He explained how his cart had tipped over during the storm and he'd wandered blindly until the light from Jeremiah's cabin led him in. Jeremiah nodded, offering him food and coffee. As they sat by the fire, Ellis noticed the upright piano standing near the wall, dusty but intact. "May I?" he asked, and Jeremiah gave a slow nod. Ellis approached the instrument like a priest nearing an altar. Ellis gently pressed the keys, the notes uneven and tired, but filled with potential. With delicate hands, he began tuning it, working slowly, respectfully, as if unlocking an old memory. Jeremiah watched in silence. That piano hadn't been touched in years, not since her. As Ellis worked, he hummed a tune, a soft, melancholic melody. Something about that tune pulled Jeremiah's mind back to a distant Christmas morning, one filled with laughter and a girl's voice. His daughter. She had played that very same melody before she vanished. A shiver went down his spine. "I've heard that song before," Jeremiah said, his voice low. Ellis looked up, surprised. "My mother used to hum it when she thought I wasn't listening," the tuner said. "She said it came from someone she met once, a man who saved her during a blizzard." The fire crackled between them, the silence suddenly thick. Jeremiah's jaw clenched. He stared into the flames, memories rising like ghosts, the night he found a woman near death in the snow, the child she carried, the note she left before disappearing again. Could it be? Was Ellis? The tuner sat back, wiping his brow, unaware of the storm brewing inside his host. He looked at the piano and asked if Jeremiah played. Not anymore, he replied. The music left with someone I cared about. Ellis didn't pry. Instead, he tuned the last string and then, reverently, sat down to play. The notes came alive, rich, warm, emotional. He played that same melody again, but this time, fully. Jeremiah felt his chest tighten, his hands trembling. That wasn't just a song. It was a memory passed down, encoded in keys and chords. Jeremiah stood slowly and crossed the room. Your mother, what was her name? Ellis looked up, puzzled. Grace, he said. Grace Harmon. She passed last spring. Never told me much about her past, only that someone once gave her shelter when she needed it most. Jeremiah's knees nearly buckled. That name, that storm, that child, it all connected. His voice cracked as he whispered, She was here. Years ago. I gave her shelter, food. She left before dawn. I never knew what happened to her. Ellis froze. The silence between them turned sacred. They sat there, staring at each other, two souls linked by fate, loss, and the echoes of a forgotten song. Jeremiah explained everything. The storm, the young woman, her kindness, her pain, the note she left saying she had to keep moving for the child's safety. Ellis listened in awe, tears forming as the pieces of his past found their missing edge. Then, you saved me too, he said. Without knowing it. Jeremiah couldn't speak. For so long, he'd carried a burden of questions. Now, he was looking into the eyes of the answer. The rest of the day passed in silence, broken only by the occasional chord drifting from the piano. Ellis played as Jeremiah sat nearby, tears drying on his cheeks. Music had returned to the cabin, not just in sound, but in meaning. That night, under the stars, they sat on the porch. Ellis said he'd been drifting for years, tuning pianos but never finding a home. Jeremiah looked at him and said, Maybe this is where your song was meant to end. A home. A family. Not by blood, but by truth. Over the following days, Ellis stayed, fixing the piano, cooking meals, asking questions about Jeremiah's life. The gruff rancher slowly opened up, sharing tales of cattle, storms, solitude. And Ellis, with his gentle hands and curious eyes, brought warmth to every corner of the home. It wasn't long before the townsfolk noticed. The cabin that once stood silent now rang with music. People came by, drawn by curiosity, and stayed for the sound. Jeremiah, once feared and avoided, was now seen differently. Not because he changed, but because the story around him had. On Sunday morning, Ellis organized a small gathering. He played the song again, this time inviting Jeremiah to sit beside him. The old man hesitated, then placed his fingers on the keys. Together they played. 2 hands, 2 generations, 1 melody. The crowd watched in awe, unaware of the deeper story behind each note. But Jeremiah knew. And as the final chord echoed through the room, he looked to Ellis and smiled. Not the smile of a man who found peace, but of a man who finally understood that some songs survive storms, time, and silence. They carry truth. And this one had finally been heard. Inside the cabin, the warmth of the fire brought a flush to Ernest's cheeks. The piano tuner, whose name was Miles, sat on the edge of the armchair, cradling a cup of coffee as if it were life itself. He began speaking slowly, telling the rancher how he'd been traveling across the state, tuning instruments in small towns, barely scraping by. He had always followed the sound of music. He said it guided him better than any map. But when the storm hit, he got lost, and his horse panicked and fled. He was prepared to die, curled up in the snow, until he saw the silhouette of the rancher atop his black mare. The story felt surreal, and something in Ernest's chest tightened as if he'd heard it all before in a different lifetime. Ernest noticed something strange as Miles moved toward the piano in the corner of the room. The man walked like he knew exactly where the keys were, his fingers stretching before even sitting down. When he struck the first note, the room transformed. The air, once tense with questions, softened. Ernest sat silently, his eyes locked on the man playing. But it wasn't just music, it was familiarity. The melody echoed something buried deep in his memory. Miles played with emotion, pain, longing. Each note seemed to pull at Ernest's soul, unearthing shadows of something he'd once forgotten. It wasn't just a song, it was a key. When the song ended, Ernest asked, "Where did you learn that?" Miles looked up slowly, confusion crossing his brow. "It's the only song I remember from my childhood," he said. "My mother used to hum it every night before she disappeared. I don't know her name. I don't know anything else, just this song and a photograph I carry." He pulled out a crumpled black and white photo from his coat, smoothing it out on the table. Ernest leaned closer. The world stood still. The woman in the picture was his sister, missing for over 30 years, thought to be dead. His mouth opened, but no words came. The truth hit like a bolt of lightning. Ernest stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the chair. His heart raced, memories crashing in like a flood. He remembered his sister's final words before she vanished, how she'd met a man she loved, how their family wouldn't approve, and how she had to disappear. Miles, unaware of the emotional tornado unraveling in front of him, watched silently. Ernest finally whispered, "Your mother was my sister." Miles froze, the color draining from his face. The fire cracked and popped behind them as generations of silence burned away. Two strangers, now family, bound by music, tragedy, and a long-forgotten promise of reunion. They talked long into the night, trading fragmented memories and piecing together the puzzle of their lives. Ernest learned how Miles had grown up in foster homes, always wondering why no one came for him. Miles learned that Ernest had searched for his sister for years, then given up when the trail went cold. The two men laughed and cried, the bitterness of the past giving way to the sweetness of connection. It was as if time had bent in their favor. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside the cabin, something greater was being rebuilt. Family, history, and the beginning of a new chapter. Over the next few days, the storm passed, and the snow began to melt. Miles decided to stay for a while, helping out on the ranch in exchange for food and shelter. Every evening, he played the piano, drawing in neighbors who had never seen the reclusive black rancher so alive. Ernest opened his doors, shared his food, and told his story. What began as an act of kindness on a cold night became a legend passed through the town like wildfire. People whispered about the piano that played the truth, about the song that reunited blood, and about the man who found his family through harmony. 27. For Ernest, something in his heart shifted forever. The man who once lived in shadows now walked proudly under the sun. His past, once too painful to speak of, had transformed into the source of his strength. Miles, too, found more than shelter, he found roots. He began writing his own songs, mixing the sorrow of his lost years with the joy of rediscovery. Together, they worked the land, cared for the animals, and opened their home to wayward travelers. The piano in the corner never went untouched, and every note it echoed told a little more of their shared story. Word of the reunion reached neighboring towns. Journalists came. Photographers snapped pictures. But Ernest didn't care for fame. What mattered was the healing. He told each visitor the same thing: we're all connected by something. Sometimes it's blood, sometimes it's music. He kept the photograph of his sister framed beside the piano. And every Sunday, Miles would play that same song, the one that started it all, as townsfolk sat in silence, their hearts beating in rhythm with the keys. The ranch wasn't just a ranch anymore, it was a place of memory, of hope, of second chances. Years passed, but the story never faded. Children grew up hearing about the black rancher who saved a man from the cold and found his own nephew in the process. Ernest's hair turned silver, and Miles became a father himself, teaching his son the melody that had changed everything. That little song became a lullaby, a hymn, and a legacy. The piano, though old and worn, never lost its magic. Every crack in its wood held a story. And each time someone touched its keys, the room seemed to whisper, "Remember, believe, forgive." So if you ever find yourself near that stretch of land where snow once threatened to swallow a soul, listen closely. You might hear faint music in the wind, a song carried from generation to generation. And know this, kindness doesn't just warm the body, it mends the heart. Ernest and Miles proved that some connections can't be broken, not by time, not by distance, not even by silence. Their story is not just about reunion, it's about redemption. If this tale touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. Your support helps us share stories that matter.